Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. I'm just going to introduce my fellow panelists. We have Nicholas Baume, Curator of Art Basel's Public Sector and Director and Chief Curator of the Public Art Fund. The legendary Lady Bunny, drag queen, DJ, performer, and founder of Wigstock. And Hrag Vartanian, who is Editor-in-Chief and co-founder of Hyperallergic. So as long as we're talking about spectacular art world events, I think we could choose a worse starting point than this one, just to kick things off. I think we can all remember a time when art world events didn't necessarily have champagne sponsors and hip-hop performances and BMW sponsorships. And I'm just curious to hear from you guys, given sort of the ever more spectacular and glitzier aspect of these art world events, I'd love to hear from each of you sort of how that's impacted your work and your role here.
I guess I feel like spectacle certainly has increased, perhaps if you define it by those kinds of champagne-branded events. But spectacle's obviously been around a long time in art and culture. The society of the spectacle, the whole critique of the commodity taking over our lives in a way. And that could certainly be related to this context. I guess I feel, in a way, that spectacle can be tiresome and like a sort of high-calorie rush that has no lasting impact, but it can also be an amazing way to grab people's attention, engage them, communicate, and open up doors to other experience. So I don't think spectacle in itself is the enemy. I think it's what does that allow? What does that make possible? How does it sort of fit into a broader context of art?
Lady Bunny, let's hear a little bit from you about the art of spectacle, maybe as opposed to spectacle in the art world.
Well, as you can see, I am very understated. And I do not know why spectacle must constantly cheapen everything. I'll take away all the nuance. No, I'm just kidding. Well, to an extent, I work in spectacle, but I work in the realm of spectacle, but you have to grab people's attention nowadays. And I mean, a lot of what I've seen is like, is this a moment big enough or important enough to warrant people pulling their phones out? I mean, are they going to pull it out, if it isn't spectacle? I mean, you have to grab their attention. And also spectacle can be something like the sculpture garden, where I think it's important, as with the theater, that you are actually there in that moment, experiencing what everyone else is, from the sculpture itself to the dancing, to the singing, to the Miami breeze. I think there are so few of these moments nowadays when, because everyone watches, catches up on their TV or the news. It's like there was a time when, the whole country experienced Roots at one time and kind of changed. So, I mean,
I'm sure Bunny.
I'm showing my age. Well, honey, the lights are showing my age. But, I think that a lot of times we are, in a different, it's important to actually be there and experience it. And, of course, cell phones can transport us to Hong Kong's Art Basel, but, there's nothing really like being there and experiencing it, eating that hamburger out of the back of that limousine, which I thought was so genius, I mean, I just happened to see a guy today with no arms painting on Lincoln Road with no feet. I mean, that was pretty outrageous, and I would have to be here in Miami to experience that.
So that actually brings up a very interesting point that I'd like you to address, Hrag. As an editor, it seems like this sort of increasingly spectacular nature of these events is designed to increase audience and engagement. You're talking about, the Instagram worthiness of every moment. But I think the struggle there is, how do curators and collectors sort of maintain their cultural authority while they're sort of expanding the proverbial tent?
Well, I mean, I think it's about focal points. you know, and it's like sometimes spectacle is that focal point that allows people not only to remember something, you know, you're like, oh, which Art Basel was it? Oh, it was the one where Lady Bunny was on the stage. Remember that one? You know, it becomes like that kind of, it becomes part of the story. And I think a smart curator is going to create those stories so that people can have a focal point to like concentrate the conversation sometimes. And I think often spectacle is also a gateway drug in terms of new people coming into it, not knowing what to think or say, but somehow feeling part of this communal experience. And I think spectacle does that really, really well. You know, so you're in a room of people, a lot of people may not know anything about art, but they can all share in that experience and talk about that experience. And I think that's really important to introducing new people to something that can feel kind of, you know, not accessible to everyone, you know, particularly. So that, I think, is a really important way of doing that.
And it shouldn't overshadow the chin stroking and admiring of the paintings or the sculpture, but it definitely adds something, especially when it's, I mean, there's so much going on in Miami. I mean, that said, you know, sometimes there are events that get piggybacked onto Art Basel. A couple of years I was treated to the paintings of Miley Cyrus, which I don't think
Were they spectacular?
made too much of a dent.
Strangely, I don't remember those.
I do. I've tried to forget them.
So where's the, as long as we're on this topic, where's sort of the tipping point? Where does spectacle become sort of a distraction? Where does it take us out of this world as opposed to bringing other people into it?
I'm not sure, but I definitely think sort of both Bunny and Hrag's points about one sort of having to have that one-to-one experience of your own in person, but also for it to be in a communal context is actually a super important and interesting thing that, you know, a lot of people complain about the isolating effects of digital culture and that everyone's locked into this dialogue with their own phone, not observing the world. When you are involved in a spectacle like the opening of Art Basel, you're experiencing that with people. And you're looking at art with people, or you're dancing, you know, together. And I think that's true, that it can create an environment that we don't experience very much sort of in our daily lives. And to be able to do that around a cultural moment as opposed to, you know, a political rally or pop concert or a religious service. You know, it's actually, I think, an incredibly valuable thing.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I'll tell you where it's really destructive is when it's like a group, it's for an elite group of 300 people and no one's allowed in. Like I remember Miley Cyrus, the concert, I was on the press list and then somehow they didn't like something I did and I got off the press list, and then other people also got pushed off because there were more VIPs coming, and you're like, this spectacle has become a total shit show.
I'm the unlucky one. I got in.
And I think that's kind of dangerous when spectacle then becomes this very elite, exclusive thing. And then it's sort of like, then you're just watching it through a screen and it doesn't feel like you can kind of get in. And I think that's really a bad thing.
So let's talk a bit, like, we think of spectacle as this, you know, a communal event, something that we're experiencing together, but what does it mean to you digitally? I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about, like, you know, what is a digital spectacle going to look like? How are other people experiencing this who aren't necessarily there? Is there any way for that experience to transfer?
No.
That settles that.
Come and see it. Well, listen, we're addicted to spectacle. I hate to bore any international visitors who haven't just been through our election, but what has the whole thing been but a shit show where our media has spent has avoided all the issues and the policies in order to talk about the insults of a reality star who's never held elected office. So, I mean, is there any turning back from spectacle in the art world or anywhere? I mean, the guy headed to the White House has no elected experience and has a pretty rotten reality TV show. and grabbed all of the attention by making statements that are ridiculous news, which is ratings driven, focused on, oh, well, we know you called Mexicans rapists. We know you called Carly Fiorina ugly. We know you mocked John McCain's war records. But what do you actually plan to do with this country? We're about to find out.
Buckle up.
So I don't know if there's any way we're addicted to spectacle. Spectacle is what drives, reality TV, train wreck behavior, and rewarding it. So, because I've got news for you. Those Real Housewives, they're not real. Real housewives take their kids to school and cook. That's kind of an insult to my mother and my sister and their families to say that housewives sit and have martinis at lunch and snatch each other's wigs off.
Right, and I think also in terms of spectacle, it's like the art world is also competing with that kind of Donald Trumpification too. So it's like it's also about getting a little bit of attention when you're dealing with this kind of reaction in this kind of world, so.
Right, and if the election demonstrates in a way this point, you can't fight that by ignoring it.
Right.
You can't be passive in relation to that. So if digital culture is spectacular, that, the advertising screens that surround us are incredible, dazzling images, artists are not going to be able to compete with that unless they play with that language, unless they somehow get in a dance that, can follow that routine, but can then flip it somehow into another register. And I think, especially working in public art, that's very much the case. You can't install a work of art, on the streets of New York City, and for it to be a wallflower, it's just going to get trampled. Right. So, an artist has to be able to kind of find an authentic voice within that kind of louder presence, if you like, that then gets the attention, invites people in, but also does something that is genuinely different from the advertising screens.
Well, one local artist had a great way of combining street art and the sensationalism of Trump. And I forget the guy's name, but there's an article in the Miami New Times, but he took dog poop, which he collected. He doesn't own a dog, and it says that they called that locally resourced, which I thought was quite amusing. But he took the locally resourced poop and put talk about a shit show, and put toothpicks with Donald Trump's face in them, and then put printouts of Donald Trump's more salacious sayings. So I think that's a great way, and very affordable and free on display for everyone in the public. Maybe not the best smelling exhibit, but it does reflect our times.
So, I'm wondering, it seems like we're getting into this more spectacular, louder and louder and more. I wonder if there's ever going to be a sort of a swing back. Is the pendulum ever going to come back the other way? Is that even possible?
I have to make a costume change before I answer that.
Well, I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think like I said, it's sort of a gateway sometimes. And it gets in and then you figure out what you like. And then sometimes it's the quiet moments you're looking for. But then, you want to share in these communal experiences. And that's totally all right, in my opinion. And I don't think it necessarily is going to be a pendulum. It's just going to be a different kind of thing. It's going to manifest itself differently. But I'm looking for quiet moments all the time, and you find that sometimes. Probably not going to find it here. But you're going to find it elsewhere. Okay, later.
I don't know that, I think actually one of the big challenges, and it goes to this kind of ADD culture that we have, is slowing people down enough to have an experience that isn't just about like grabbing the selfie, posting it, running on to the next thing. And I do think something like the experience you have in Collins Park can be that, where you might see works by 20 different artists that range from, Ugo Rondinoni's sort of spectacular fluorescent Miami Mountain, which is, a super spectacular work, to Sol LeWitt's Incomplete Open Cubes. Very, quiet, minimal, conceptual, but incredibly beautiful and contemplative work. And I've been looking at people move through the park, and I think it does slow people down, and that range of work can do that.
Right, so the spectacle is your entrance point to a very different kind of experience. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how this broader concept of spectacle is influencing the way that artists work. I mean, what have you seen, for example?
Well, I think artists are thinking of their work in different ways, meaning like they're kind of staging focal points, like thinking of like, okay, well, how am I going to get people to take a photograph of this, share it? It's like it's not just about the review anymore. It's not just about getting people through the door. It's about like sort of getting your message out there. And they're trying to think of like, how can I get that message out there through all these different networks that are already there? I mean, we can't pretend like, we can't necessarily fight all the networks that are already established, all the time. People are trying to get the word out in different ways. And I think it's thinking that way, but then also thinking that's not the only thing I'm doing. I have these different layers, and when people take the time, they're going to find those different layers. They're going to pick up the artist book that they can read at home. They can, go watch this film somewhere or something. So there are different layers. It's not just one thing anymore.
But sometimes it seems that, so you have a gallery exhibit and you want to, showcase your work. Someone comes in, takes a picture of it. Well, they put it on the internet and it may get lots of likes on their Instagram account, but you didn't buy it. You didn't, even buy the book or the postcard. So it's like, we do have the internet celebrities, and maybe it likes, whether they're on YouTube videos or Instagram or whatever, are a way for the public to find things that they like, possibly bypassing ye old gatekeepers like the New York Times, or art, publications. But at the same time, it can distract if you're never in the moment because you're always documenting the moment. You're not dancing because you're videotaping someone else dancing. You're not, you know what I mean? It's like rather than bringing something to the party, you're sucking something out of the party because the real party is online where you may have thousands. Only 300 can fit in that room. Does that make any sense? Mm-hmm.
And I do know some gallerists, for instance, that complain when their gallery's too full, they can't even sell. There are those types of things too. It's not just sort of one way. It's not just about getting all the word out and getting the room packed. It's about getting the right people into the room sometimes. And when they mean that, people are really interested in the work, that are really sort of passionate about being there, as opposed to just taking a photo and sharing it.
I think so, as these things have gotten larger and sort of more spectacular and inclusive, and, especially in the way that the art world has embraced film and fashion and music, we've seen some sort of growing pains in these, like, really spectacular blowout events. I'm thinking, like, specifically of the Bjork exhibition at MoMA, which definitely was a spectacle and drew a huge audience, but was also pretty universally panned. So I'm wondering if you guys have seen any lessons from these sort of bigger, more spectacular events that are useful going forward.
Look, those boundaries between fashion and art or music, performance, they are inherently artificial, and a lot of artists don't define themselves these days, as being, well, I'm just a painter or I'm a sculptor, and I think that's a good thing, and I think it's great for artists to be involved in creative expression with colleagues in other disciplines. I have friends, of course, who come from the performance field, and performance has, yeah, of course.
Really? They must be very theatrical.
But you have all these sort of traditional performance venues, kind of non-profits in New York, who are now seeing MoMA presenting, performance program. And the performance artists that used to love being in all of these smaller venues now are getting invited by big museums. And so it's a shift in that ecology. But I think
And then part of that shift, since I think I've been in 3 exhibits in New York, from MoMA to one playing now called Gay Gotham, is if you stick around long enough, you become art. Thankfully.
I mean, I think the biggest negative is kind of a scene that sort of eats its young, meaning like they sort of take something that's sort of hot and still developing, and then give it sometimes a stage that maybe is a little too big for that, and it sort of like forces them to sort of fall into a style or a mannerist kind of like, and I think that's really dangerous, because it can really ruin an artist, and they don't know how to deal with it. And I think that's where spectacle becomes a bit of a problem, where then it just becomes that, and then they sort of, their head gets big, and they think they know everything they're doing, and you're just like, no, you need a little bit of work, and then they don't, and then they sort of get caught up in that, and that can be really bad for an artist.
well, that's in a way that right. There's a difference between being able to have that element of spectacle and simply be a commodity,
Right.
and that definitely is sort of a part of the risk.
Yeah.
But when you see great artists, who've in a way kind of shaped this territory from Warhol on, had an incredibly sophisticated grasp of how to use those different networks and channels to create their own work and to collaborate with other artists. So it's interesting to see where new kinds of communication open up new platforms for those collaborations.
Do you think we're going to see a bigger role for public art going forward?
I do. I mean, I think we've already seen that, actually. If you, I'm a New Yorker, and it's certainly the case there, and I think for many cities, Miami included, every new public space now has to have public art. Where you have, cities around the world asking their artists to create works. I think it really adds a lot to the vitality and vibrancy of a city. So, and I think we make a lot of sacrifices living in a big city, and having that cultural activity is one of the things that, in a sense, you move to the city for. So I think people really appreciate it.
And I think Miami is a place that is not just, there's a connection between Miami and New York, not only because of the musical connection, but, because Miami is one of the cities that has the most flavor in the U.S. I mean, it is the gateway to the Caribbean. And, there's a lot of people who may be going to galleries earlier in the day or doing serious, work and handing those business cards out, curators and artists, and, but then there's also the party people who want to let loose because we're in this paradise at night. So, yes, there are the events at the Delano and Faina where, I saw an amazing performance by Christine with 2 E's, who is a drag performer from Austin, who was baring her ass cheeks while rapping "Taste My Pain." And it sounds gross, but it was it totally connected with the audience. It was really this primordial, insane, thing. And to see this beautiful theater at Faina and have like a, plus-sized burlesque artist named Dirty Martini offering them this Tony crowd, eggs from a styrofoam carton of eggs. I don't know. I'm not a world famous art critic, but that kind of did it for me. And
I'm so sad I missed that.
Well, that was part of Charlie
What
Wood.
did they do with the eggs?
That's the question. Which came first, the stripper or the eggs? No, it's I don't know exactly, but it was part of something called Charlie Wood by Charlie Lemindu, a very high-end English or French rather hairdresser who lives in England, and it was a whole thing where hair is his medium. So it was video and striptease with hair. I mean, I think people do want to let loose. I mean, tonight, Joey Arias and transsexual icon Amanda Lepore will be performing with Suzanne Barr. So, I mean, that's just another, it's another element to our Basel, maybe not the most high-minded, but it's a way to let loose now that we've come together from all over the world to, and it's important to get together and be in those spaces and have a few drinks and let loose and say, we're still here. We've been at each other's throats for the entire time of this election, but damn it, we still know how to have a good time and appreciate things of beauty, which can uplift and inspire. Or make you think.
I love it.
Or make you think.
Absolutely. I think the one danger with public art, as much as I love public art, is that if we don't have a solid education system that teaches people about art, and we don't have that right now. A lot of elementary schools don't even have art. There are high schools with, it's like, it becomes like a Band-Aid solution that ends up alienating people. And especially if it's sophisticated public art, it can alienate people. And I see that in places like the UAE, where they do public art, but the public schools there don't even have art classes. And I think that's a real problem. Then it just looks kind of like a top-down approach to culture. And I don't believe in that. And I think that's where we should be careful with public art. It's not just a Band-Aid. It should be part of a more holistic approach.
Spectacle without context can do more harm than good, it seems like. So I'm curious, gaze into your crystal ball for us for a minute and tell us what the future of these big, spectacular events in the art world look like.
I can't imagine they're not going to get bigger, because as we sort of become more global, I think they're just going to have, we see artists now that do shows in 4 different cities at a time. I actually kind of feel like the spectacles are going to kind of work that way. They're going to become almost like simultaneous, in different places. It feels like it's going to be that way. I don't know if it is, but that's my guess.
But, I have a painter friend who's, been commissioned by the New York Times, by Oprah to do a portrait, all kinds of, so, Scott Lifshutz. I said, he said, oh, I'm so excited, I got a show. I said, oh, really, when? Salt Lake City, 2017. This was a couple of years ago, and I was like, you're really well respected. Is it that difficult to get shows? Well, in fact, it is, and so for people to be able to come to one place and show their wares to, whether it's at a street fair or, to loads of people convening who are interested in art and who may take notice of them and make something happen. That is a great thing, and that does make it worth it's sometimes overexpensive and small hotel room, which slaps a resort tax on you. Did any of you get that one? But it reminds me of my small overpriced apartment in New York, so it's not that big of a deal.
It is interesting to think that the art world and events like this one are sort of built on international networks, and they depend on that kind of exchange, artists from all over the world, galleries, collectors, and we're at a moment where we're seeing a kind of retrenchment to nationalism all over the world. And if art and this kind of event represent the continuation of that dialogue, I think that actually gives it a strength and a power that's really important. So I hope that if the spectacle just continues to increase, that at the same time those international exchanges continue as well.
Just to go back to the way artists are working around these issues for a minute, I'm wondering, is there a concern that artists who don't feel comfortable in this sort of spectacular vocabulary sort of get lost in the shuffle? Do you worry that there are people whose voices aren't going to be heard because they can't engage at this level? Some artists know exactly how to get people's attention, but there are others who may not do that so well.
I'm very shy.
Yes, it's a challenge, I think, to every artist. I had lunch with an artist today whose work is very, very contemplative and quiet and beautiful and serious. And I asked him how he felt about, does he get lost in this? And And he, I think, felt like, in a way, that can happen, but that he has sort of some bodies of work that are more kind of, more accessible, more photographable than others, and that, if those pieces can kind of attract people, they'll find the others. But I think there is that risk to some artists, certainly, of just not getting traction in this context.
It's your notion of spectacle as the gateway, but I mean, do you worry that there are people who are getting lost in the shuffle, that their voices are just not going to be heard at this level?
Well, I think most artists are sort of, they're multifaceted. Sometimes that spectacle is in their activism. Do you know what I mean? It's not in the actual artwork. Sometimes it's in their lectures, in their performance lectures, or sometimes it's in a different aspect. It's not always in the work on the wall. You know what I mean? It's not always in their sculpture. So, and then some artists are the opposite. So as long as you think of them more holistically, I think it ends up becoming like they sort of just integrate it into their lives in different ways. Maybe it's an internet persona they've created, or something like that. It's not always in the artwork itself, or at least in the traditional kind of artwork they're selling at a fair like this.
Right. So the challenge then is to figure out, which aspect of your persona or your work can relate to this spectacular moment that we're all living through.
Right.
So would you mean, like as an example, like someone who well, I mean, I was very curious about the Miley Cyrus exhibit, but, obviously she's known mainly for her music, but someone was telling me that they really loved her stance on trans issues, or for anyone who's uncomfortable, please know that my pronoun that I'm happy with is anything from Miss Thing to girlfriend. So don't be pissy about that. But it was interesting to me because technically she is a singer. And I said, she had drag queens perform on this music award show with her. And I said, oh, really? Must have been a dance song, because if drag queens are not going to perform to a ballad. They said, it was kind of, well, I said, wow, okay. So I said, are you a fan of Miley Cyrus? She said, yes. I said, may I ask if it's because she's rumored to be bisexual? And they said, yes, and because they were lesbian. And I was just, like blown away. They couldn't name the genre of music that she had performed the night before, but they knew her charity stuff and her trans stuff. So I mean, sometimes it seems like the actual product, like what kind of music is it, Miley? It's like not that I should sully Art Basel with, constantly talking about Miley Cyrus from 2 or 3 years ago, but that was kind of a weird thing. But sometimes, your art gets lost in all of the other things, right? I mean,
well, there's trappings, and then you think of something like ACT UP. Like some of those people that were involved in that and were doing really awesome things, they weren't really people who were necessarily doing that in other parts of their lives, And it's like, and so you kind of have to, they sort of integrate it in this one thing or this one aspect that ends up using spectacle for sometimes a means or an end, whether it's about raising trans issues or any other kind of issues that they know that they can get that extra attention with, and it's so, in that way, it's kind of useful.
Yeah, I mean, Nicholas, what do you think about the way that spectacle is you talked about how you think those distinctions between art, music, and fashion are a little bit artificial. Do you think this idea of spectacle has sort of broken down a lot of those barriers?
No, I think they persist because the market tends to sort of reinforce those boundaries, and it's much harder to sort of be recognized as someone who doesn't fit into something very neatly. But I think there's a lot more potential for that kind of exchange to happen. I guess there are different moments in history. If you look back to kind of the 60s and the rise of minimalism, when dancers, musicians, and artists were all responding to very similar ideas in different forms. I mean, that now seems like, it was another century, quite literally, but it does feel to me like there's a lot that artists have to offer each other across those disciplines. So it's great when you see people kind of mixing it up, which is one reason, it's fantastic to have Lady Bunny as a part of, the opening celebrations for the public art installation here. And I'm all for kind of mixing up those boundaries.
Well, I mean, there is an artist whose work is on the outside of the Wolfsonian. I can't pronounce her name. A Dutch artist, the very colorful. It's gorgeous. What is it? Christine Van der. Well, I think I saw a shoe with that print on in a store. Now, I couldn't buy the Wolfsonian, but I might be able to buy that shoe if they have it in my size. But if that's blending, art and fashion, that's great. My favorite exhibit was Theater of Self with Daniel Lismore, who is just basically like a club kid who got together with SCAD, and he found basically trash on the streets and created the most amazing costumes, and they were all on display in Miami at I don't remember the name of the gallery, but it was called Theater of Self, because he is himself walking theater with just these objects that he found, and that was, I mean, it was art to me.
I'd love to hear from you guys also if you have any examples of spectacle that you found really compelling either this week or earlier.
Well, I think Lady Bunny was the greatest spectacle this week. I hope some of you got to see her disco.
I'll tell you the one that I'm glad nobody got to see, because he threw the phone down. But I went to Daniel Lismore's Theater of Self exhibit. He said, "Let's take a video for Instagram." I said, "Okay, how about me running around all these beautifully lit costumes that are mounted so gorgeously?" And I did, and I tripped, and I clutched one of them, and the mannequin fell over. So, putting the that was the real mannequin challenge.
I have to say this week I've sort of been avoiding some of the spectacle in general, just because I feel like it's sort of after this election I've sort of needed less spectacle right now, just personally, but that's just sort of a personal choice. And I think just sometimes you gotta be a little introverted, after so much spectacle for so long. So that's been kind of where I've been at.
On the subject of spectacle fatigue, I want to make sure we save some time for questions from the audience. So first of all, thank you guys so much for the discussion. And we have a microphone floating around if we have any questions out here. No
We've
questions.
stumped them.
I have a question. I'm kind of curious more of Hrag, what you were talking about education. It seems like the mega events are taking away from funding or energy that could go towards education. Can you guys touch on that a little bit or no?
I could say that one of the trends I've been kind of seeing is things like foundations that are trying to fund things that will just get them PR. As opposed to funding things that are actually part of building an infrastructure and actually supporting stuff that's already there. And that concerns me, because if everyone's just sort of giving money so they can get their name on something and get a couple of splashy headlines, then, that's not the way of building an infrastructure that's going to support culture,
Sure, but I think there are foundations that are very consciously working against that, maybe in reaction to this sort of idea that everyone has to be branded all the time. Right. The Ford Foundation, for example.
Well, they're pretty unique. That's definitely
right. I think they're amazing leaders in recognizing that, if you run a nonprofit, paying the electricity bills is actually, what is going to keep things running, even if you're not going to get some nice, advertising credit on the new exhibit. But I think it is a great point. It's important for everyone that wants to support the culture of nonprofits and of education to think holistically about what it takes for those things to happen and take place. I would hope that certainly in the US, public art is not a Band-Aid. Hopefully it actually can complement and expand, the awareness and the sensitivity of, kids and adults to the visual realm and to creativity. But I think I totally agree, it can be a problem if it is sort of a token gesture but that's exactly the same, for museums and the rest of sort of high art.
So for public art, we should all look forward to plenty of bronze nudes of Melania Trump.
Any
And
other-
actually, speaking of theater himself, Daniel Lismore is actually there, and that is something that you just threw on just now, didn't you? Because you were late. Stand up, girl. Oh, now shy. How long is your exhibit up? Till the 13th.
Other questions out there? Yes?
Yeah, hi. My name is Claire, and I work as an art curator in Miami. I'm curious to hear from you what you feel marks a successful artwork, because I feel hearing you speak, it kind of speaks to the fact that we consider a successful artwork to be that most seen and that most accessible, and I'm just wondering if there's ways in which we can break that down a little bit and really deconstruct other ways of thinking about what makes a successful artwork.
I think maybe just want to distill the question just a little bit. What makes a successful artwork?
Yeah,
Well, I think it's if I'll try to answer that. I think in this context, since we're talking about spectacle, we're talking, I think, a little bit about those aspects. But I think a successful artwork is something that's going to touch an audience that, intended or not intended, and is going to maybe sort of make them think about something different or sort of open up their minds to different kinds of things, but then also just challenge boundaries and challenge, different kinds of, ideas of what art can work like, or what public space is, and all these types of things. So I think a lot of those things we're talking about is in regards to spectacle and how that would sort of probably be judged. Does that sound right?
I mean, I think the biggest problem and challenge and risk for artists who do take on this idea of kind of playing with spectacle is to not end up just being consumed by that. There has to be a point of resistance. There has to be something that like flips it and makes you think differently about it, or raises some ambiguity, or provokes you to think differently in some way. And I think, mostly that happens when an artist is able to to create something that feels authentically a voice. When you kind of recognize that you are, hearing a voice or seeing a language that belongs to an individual, and can you break through this sort of commercialized context to that sort of moment of creative vision.
Any more?
Thank
Yes.
you. Wonderful panel. I'm Richard Rappaport. I'm an entertainment attorney. Why are we not celebrating the art of the anonymous?
The art of what, baby?
Why are we not celebrating the art of the anonymous? Why must art be limited to the four walls of this building? You are all artful. Wonderful panel, right, everyone? Incredible panel. There is art in everything that you say, everything that you do. There is art in the beach, there's art in the ocean. New York City is an artful place. Why are we not celebrating it much more than we are?
The art of the anonymous. Well, I mean, I think we do.
The anonymity of individuals who make a movement, is that artistic? I'm a BMI artist, I play guitar. Is that artistic? I think it is. Are you artistic? In other words, why must we define it in a narrow fashion? Why can it not be universal?
I don't think we're necessarily defining it narrowly. I mean, I think the art of the anonymous is in the memes we share. An art of the anonymous is in the sort of the culture we celebrate. The only way we can, the only way to like perpetuate a culture is by becoming part of it and then celebrating it yourself. So, each of us is making a choice every single day what culture we're going to celebrate. Do you know what I mean? By what we watch, by what we do, where we go. Coming to this event, you're kind of, you're part of a culture. You know what I mean? So you have to make that choice yourself, and we all make that choice individually, I think.
Yeah, and I think in a way what you're saying is, the human imagination responds to all kinds of things, natural, man-made, and
Why is everyone looking at me? Honey, my girdle is expanding boundaries right now. Go ahead. I don't mean to stop you.
I somehow lost my train of thought.
My girdle does that to men.
Well, I was just but I was just saying
I wish.
It's all about works of art sensitizing us and heightening our perception of the world around us. What do you think?
Like the statue of Jesus with avocados on it, which I found quite interesting because, well, is that normally, the statue normally there? And they just put the avocados on there because...
Tony Mattelli's Jesus sculpture. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was curious. It sparked my interest because, well, as I've already mentioned, roots, which you said aged me. Avocados are known for their hair conditioning properties. Since he had avocados all over his hair. So it made me think. I mean, some people might have thought that was sacrilegious if it were an existing statue. And we all remember, Andre Serrano's Piss Christ, which got so much, flack. But then I inquired and actually learned that the figure of Jesus with avocados sprinkled on it is from Santeria, which is like the Caribbean, the Latin voodoo. So maybe.
I had no idea.
Well, I guess I just know. Well, maybe my friend was wrong. He couldn't speak English that well, and we were kind of drunk.
Guys, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank the panelists for a really interesting discussion. Thank you. And thank you for your questions and for being here. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great weekend.